So welcome, everyone. My name is Louis Fawcett. I serve as the president of the National Association of Nonprofit Organizations and Executives, which is just a very long way of saying that I have the honor of traveling around this great nation every week to meet with nonprofits and to encourage them in their work and to help them solve their management and fundraising needs. My career in the nonprofit sector has spanned 25 years in a variety of settings. And so I want to let you all know that you are my heroes. I know that you are on the front lines. And I know that there are days when you wonder if anyone is listening, if anyone cares about your mission, if anyone is reading your newsletters, your emails, if anyone is going to return your calls. And I want to let you know that I've been there many, many times, days where I wonder why and should I be doing something different. I've had that thought over the last 25 years, but I always come back to one core value, and that is that I believe I have a purpose to help change and save lives. And I also believe that you all on this call today have a purpose to change and save lives. And that undergirds everything that we do every day. And it drives us through those moments of despair or dark days or cloudy days where we wonder. And I want to encourage you to continue to push through because your perseverance, your relentless incrementalism, your desire to change and save lives over the long term will win the day. So I wanted to start with that because we're going to be talking about money. And the reason that we spend so much time talking about money is because you can't continue and also grow your mission without money. It is the currency that has been given to us in this world to change and save lives. And in order to continue to grow your missions, you need to be able to pay your bills today. And you also need to take a long-term view for your organization about how you're going to be vital and growing and engaged for decades. That is why today we're going to be talking about endowments and planned giving and making the ask, because we know that when we engage properly with donors, when we serve their interests and treat them as our customers, when we are helping them meet their goals, then they will give generously over and over and over again. I'm joined today by my colleague, Tim Burkhart. Tim, do you find yourself in Indiana today?
Yes, actually, and yep, it's cold and gray. At least it's been that way for a while. Yeah, yeah.
Tim,
And
share with us a little bit about your journey in the nonprofit sector.
yeah, I'm a chief legacy officer for FM Financial and also DSI counselor. I've been in this space for over 30 years, working with a wide array of different charities. We higher education institutions, human service organizations, um, Christian organizations, churches, and various organizations such as that. And so I have come alongside a lot of leaders in the nonprofit realm for many years, trying to help them to understand the value of all types of gifts. I've specialized a lot, not only in major gifts, but specifically planned gifts. And so every gift is a planned gift, in my opinion. So whether it's a major gift that's made now with significant cash, or if it's made 20, 30, 50 years from now, it's a planned gift because each person usually makes a plan at some point or another to release significant financial resources to your charity. And in doing that, it's just not a flippant decision. and they come down and say, hey, this is something that I've really put a lot of myself into it. And so usually then you've got to match that passion on your end as to why it's significant to you to receive that gift. And so that's usually, in my mind, the cusp of getting major gifts, is trying to come to that point where you're able to show value that exceeds the value that they have put into whatever they've earned to do what they've done, and they see the public good of that potential. So I've spent my whole career doing that, working in the nonprofit realm, and I'm excited to be able to share with you guys today.
Thanks, Tim. So allow me to share with you our roadmap for today. We're going to start by reviewing the major gifts ramp-up model. And the reason we are going to review that model is because if you're going to get to the point where you've earned the right with grace and propriety to ask someone for a planned gift, a major gift, a legacy gift, a gift to your endowment, that's going to take a significant amount of relationship work to help bring them to that point. So the major gifts ramp up model is what we use to identify and cultivate donors to bring them to the point of presenting the opportunity for them to give a legacy gift to your organization. Then I'm going to turn it over to Tim, and he's going to talk specifically about endowments and planned giving and making the ask, the items that we put in today's description, so that you can see in detail how you come to the point of presenting this opportunity to your donors. Throughout my presentation, Tim's presentation, please, you're welcome to ask questions. So you can unmute yourself, tell us your name and your organization and your impact, and then we invite your question. There's also in Zoom a place for you to raise your hand. It's a little virtual hand that goes up, and that helps us see that you have a question, and we will do our best to get to it. Now, it's hard for us to monitor the chat and talk at the same time. So you're welcome to put a question in the chat, but we won't get to it as quickly as if you raise your hand or unmute yourself. So you're welcome to interrupt us throughout this morning. And then the last segment will be that question and answer segment as well for any remaining comments or questions that you have. So that's where we're headed. We are going, I think, to wrap up in less than 3 hours. So don't worry, we won't take too much of your time, but we want to deliver to you as much content as possible. All right. So with that being said, we're going to jump into the major gifts ramp up model. Now, this model has been used for 34 years in more than 1,000 organizations to raise over $1 billion. It's a model based on normative human relationships, which means this works everywhere. We've used it in all 50 states and the United Kingdom. It is an opportunity for you to meet people of wealth, to introduce them to what you're doing, to learn more about them, and then to connect them to the impact of your organization. So then they are invited to invest. The model is comprised of 3 6-month phases, and I'm going to share those with you now. So you should see now on your screen the big triangle and the 3 phases: the planning phase, the building phase, and the inviting phase, each lasting approximately 6 months. We dive in with chapter 1, management philosophy. And management philosophy is simply this: most nonprofits spend 95 to 99% of their time on program service delivery and then they treat donors like ATM machines. We have a tendency to believe that we are doing the higher work. We are doing the important work in our communities. We are boots on the ground. We have our finger on the pulse of what people are suffering through with the needs of veterans and homelessness and education and the arts and the environment and animals and all of these important needs. And we have a tendency to think to ourselves, well, we're doing this work every day, 50, 60 hours a week, and these rich people have it easy and they should just give us money. When the reality is there are 1.5 million nonprofits in this country, and there are many, many people doing good work and making an impact. And philanthropists have many opportunities to choose an organization to support. So rather than seeing a philanthropist or donor as simply an ATM machine that you go to once a year when you need money, we invite you to turn this around and view these folks as your customers. They are the ones paying the bills. And when you begin to repurpose your time and view donors as your customers, then you will have more and more money coming in. Every good business, you all know this, has a sales force. And they spend a lot of time nurturing and cultivating and serving the needs of their customers because they want to grow their business. And it's no different in the nonprofit sector. When you include donors as part of your day, as part of your mission, as part of your work, then they feel valued, they feel involved with what you're doing, they feel heard, and you can invite them to give bigger and bigger gifts. I often think about my relationship with my wife. And every year we have an anniversary and we'll have a celebration. You know, I may get her flowers or a gift. We may go out to dinner. I'll tell her I love her and that she's wonderful. But you all know that that doesn't mean that I get to go 364 days without talking to her. That's not going to go well for me. And it's the same with donors. When we go to them once a year at the gala or at the end of the year for holiday giving or whenever it is that we make our ask and we take them for granted and we expect them to continue to give, they feel objectified. They feel that we're taking advantage of them. They feel that we're not investing in the relationship. So in the same way that I have to invest in my marriage every day, we're asking you to invest in donors every day. And that change in management philosophy will transform your organization and begin to instill a culture of philanthropy, not just for your day, but also for your coworkers and your board. Now, we understand that you can't meaningfully steward thousands of relationships. You may have board members who say, well, you know, we just need to get a better social media presence. And, you know, maybe we could do a GoFundMe, you know, just like the Ice Bucket Challenge. If we could have a viral video, you know, we could get more donors. And then you have that board member who says, you know, if we had 1,000 people give $1,000, we'd have $1 million. And these ideas are non-thinking. They say these things because they feel like they have to, but you and I both know that these things don't work. And trying to come up with the latest idea, the latest scheme to make money, mud run, glow run, golf tournament, auction, silent auction, whatever it, raffle, whatever it is just a scheme. And it's like going into the casino. Yes, there are people in the casino that hit it rich on the slot machines, but you all know that 99.9% of the people who gamble lose money. And it's the same with nonprofits. If you think you're going to come up with some wonderful idea that's going to create a windfall for your organization, you are going to be wasting your time. Instead, we invite you to invest deeply in your top 100 relationships, because you can manage effectively 100 relationships with major donors over the course of a year. So we teach the major gifts ramp up model in this triangle fashion, but you can also flip it upside down and view it like a funnel, where we're beginning with 2,500 millionaires and community influencers, and we're funneling down to your top 100. And I'm going to describe those 2,500 in a few minutes. Now, in order to effectively ask for money, we have to go through a process of organizational development. Now, that is not strategic planning. Strategic planning is done in a cabin on a hill over a weekend with Post-it notes and flip charts and highlighters and Sharpies, and everyone gets excited and the board comes and they have all of these ideas about how you're going to save the world. And then coming out of that meeting, someone creates flow charts, spreadsheets, org charts, narratives, and puts everything in a notebook, and everybody gets a copy of the notebook that says strategic plan on the spine. The notebook goes on the shelf, and a year later, no one knows what's in the notebook. So organizational development is not something that we involve the board with. It's not something that we involve every staff member with. Rather, you are just going to be working with your top leaders to take a realistic view of where you are now and where you are headed. Organizational development is a real-time battle plan that assesses where the organization is and where you want to be in 3 to 5 years. And you create an associated budget that's going to be needed to grow your impact. This is your opportunity to throw in everything that needs to be put in the budget to properly staff your organization, to properly have the supplies and equipment that you need, to provide healthcare and benefits to your staff members and competitive salaries so that you can recruit and retain the best and brightest employees. These are the things that will grow your mission and your impact year over year, decade over decade. Also in organizational development, this is your opportunity to begin to talk about an endowment. Some of you may have an endowment. Others of you have no endowment or reserved fund, because we find that many nonprofits are working hard today to pay for yesterday's bills. Well, you all know in your personal lives that this is not sustainable. It's not realistic. In your personal lives, you have to have enough money every month to pay your operating expenses, right? So that you're not running in debt every month. Then you need to have some savings in place, because you may need a new roof or HVAC system, or you may need to do some remodeling or something to your yard, or you may have a car repair. So it's good to have some savings. And then, of course, you don't want to work forever. So you have a retirement plan so that you have a long-term plan for your life. It's the same with nonprofits. We have to address our operating expenses and make sure that they are funded properly. We need to have a fund for capital expenses, whether that be one-time expenses like transportation or remodeling or new land or new building. But we need to have those funds that we're saving for those big expenses. And then we need to create an endowment, because the endowment sits there and earns money and can be drawn upon by the organization. And that ensures your impact, as I said, year over year and decade over decade. Princeton, the University of Princeton in New Jersey, their endowment is $34 billion. $34 billion. That means that every year, if they do nothing, it spins off $1.7 billion that they can use for their institution. Now, I promise you, at some point, maybe 300 or 400 years ago, someone said, we need to start an endowment. And people began to give to it because they began to talk about it and offer opportunities. I can also promise you that even though their endowment is 34 billion, people continue to give to it. And you might be saying, well, why in the world would anybody give to a $34 billion endowment? They don't need more money. But they do. Because I promise you, the people who are in plan giving and estate giving with Princeton are making very compelling cases about the ways that donors can be involved to create a legacy for their family, and people want to be involved with successful organizations. It's no different for your nonprofit. You have to begin the conversation about how you're going to establish your endowment fund. How is it going to be structured? Tim's going to talk about this in a few minutes. What are ways that people can contribute to the fund? And what is our long-term vision for how much we need and how we're going to use it? When we establish this during organizational development and agree internally about our endowment, it then allows us to message this plan giving and endowment opportunity to our donors. And this is why we develop a case for support. A case for support is typically an 8 or 12-page document that lays out for donors, for your customers, for your investors, what your organization has done in the past, how your organization is woven into the tapestry of your community, the impact that your organization is having now, and then your future vision for the next 3 to 5 years. Once we develop this case for support, we then test it with early leaders. We market test it to make sure that we're hitting the right notes, that everything is spelled correctly, that we are including the right people, and we ask then for their advice so we can make any adjustments, but asking for their advice also involves them early on in our efforts. If you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. So the first approach with any conversation with a donor should be to invite them into the process and ask for their advice. Now, I'd like to take a moment and share with you an example or two of cases for support. Now, this is an interesting organization. They're in Santa Barbara, California. They're the Terrace Foundation. You should be able to see that on your screen now. And they are doing urban farming, and they've had these vertical towers where they can, with hydroponics, grow incredible produce. They have a whole farm where they're producing all kinds of fruits and vegetables in a very small area. They have bees, they have composting, and this is all in the middle of Santa Barbara. And as it turns out, while Santa Barbara is a place of wealth, it's also a county where there are 5 food deserts. So their mission is to help provide healthy produce to these 5 food deserts. So they have a great cover, this cute little girl holding up apples, and a very simple title, Affordable Meals Every Day Now, Solving Food Insecurity in Santa Barbara. Then they lay out their mission. There's compelling text. It's very clear and easy to read. Great pictures that describe urban farming. Then they lay out the history of Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara is a county with a rich history of agriculture, and then they connect that history of agriculture with the work that they're doing in urban farming. They also are very clear, their founders passionate about this, to hold up the mirror, right? To let people know that 45,000 of their neighbors in Santa Barbara are food insecure, and 20,000 of these are seniors. So there is an urgent need that needs to be met, and they have viable solutions. So they have this umbrella of promise where they're going to sow, grow, harvest, prepare, and share. And you can see down in the bottom left-hand corner how they have these growing towers that they use. Then solution number 2 is community meals. They are providing meals for people in their community every day. Solution number 3, education and outreach. They want kids to learn about urban farming, which is the long-term solution to solving these issues of food deserts. They have community gardens and a variety of wonderful education programs. Now, then they present a 3-year campaign revenue budget. They're going to grow their urban farm food production. They're going to grow their distribution. They're going to scale the terrace property. They're going to transport food to seniors. They also plan to purchase 3 additional acres of land and hundreds of more aeroponic tower farms. They see this as an opportunity to beta test this in Santa Barbara, and then this can be deployed throughout the United States. You will notice that they're also have in their campaign a modest goal of $500,000 toward their endowment or reserve fund because they're just kicking off then their efforts to secure planned giving. But I want you to see that as they go to folks and develop relationships, they are laying out the entire plan, and it helps donors connect the dots on where they are now and where they're headed. On the back of their case for support, they list their host committee, and we're going to talk about what a host committee or an advisory council is in just a minute. So that's a wonderful example of a case for support. And there are hundreds of more examples, but I wanted you to see how we think about and lay out in a case for support the work that we've done in organizational development. This case for support is like an investment prospectus for your donors. At the same time that we're developing case for support, we also lay out an advancement calendar. The advancement calendar is 18 months where you are taking a look at all of the things you know you need to accomplish for your organization, and then you're overlaying the tasks of Major Gifts Ramp Up. Now, it looks like a very simple thing. Oh, we're going to look at the next 18 months, and we invite you to purchase 6 90-day dry erase calendars, put them in your boardroom, sit down with 2 or 3 trusted leaders on your staff, and take a look at everything you need to do for the next 18 months. Now, this idea may seem overwhelming, and it can be. In fact, this afternoon, I'm going to be working on an advancement calendar with an organization in California. But here's what's great about looking at the next 18 months. It forces you to deal with issues that perhaps you would rather avoid, or maybe things that you've talked about but haven't acted on. Because when you lay out 18 months, you realize that you're going to have to establish your priorities. And we encourage you to establish your priorities around revenue generation, which means you can't do everything. We can't have everyone working 50, 60 hours a week, burned out, alcoholic, depressed, divorced, right? It's not healthy for anyone in our organization, nor is it a long-term plan to grow your impact. So you have to prioritize revenue generation, and you have to figure out ways to monetize every hour as you plan the next 18 months. So this is why we encourage you to build into this calendar opportunities to interact intentionally with major donors. I'm not frankly interested in a $25 gift. That may sound nice that someone gives $25, but unless they have capacity to give $25,000, we need to focus our time on people of wealth who can give. Now, how do we identify those people? Well, in order to identify people who can give significantly to our organization, i.e. people who can give to our endowment, to our reserve fund, we need to understand in our communities who are the people of wealth. I promise you at Princeton, that $34 billion endowment, that they have a whole team of people dedicated to researching and finding out who in their alumni, what corporations are giving to the needs that they are addressing in their institution. So we want to provide you with realistic tools that you can use in your communities to identify people of wealth. So list number one is your current donors, your existing file, people who are already in your universe. We want to take everyone that's in your existing file of donors and upload them to DonorScope. I'm going to show you DonorScope in a minute. We're going to upload their names and home addresses to DonorScope, and then that's going to match with Experian data that is then going to return to us their wealth capacity. So if you have 1,000 donors that you upload, we typically find 15 to 20% of them are not giving at their full capacity. That means you have immediately 150 to 200 people within your existing universe that already know you, that are already giving to you, that you can reach out to and invite them to give at a higher level. I'll use the stereotypical little old lady, right? You may very well have a sweet little old lady who's giving you $25 a month or $100 a year. Or, every year at Christmas, you see that $250 check come in from Mildred, right? And you can see that her hand is shaking as she's, but I promise you this gift comes from her heart because she loves your organization. She loves what you're doing. Well, when we wealth screen this file, we may learn that Mildred doesn't have a lot of money on a monthly basis, but Mildred has a substantial amount of money in net worth. And it may be very meaningful to her to know that she can leave a legacy for herself, for her family, for her loved ones by giving a planned gift to your organization. That doesn't affect her cash flow right now, but when she passes on, becomes a tremendous gift to her community and indeed a tremendous gift to her family because she's honored them in that way. So list number one, we need to understand who are the donors that are already in our universe and what is their wealth capacity. List number two, we want to build a community file made up of donors and board members to other organizations, because we know that if people are involved with other organizations, they're already philanthropically minded. We also know that they're often looking for their next project or their next nonprofit. So we want to build a list of at least 200 people who are already involved in other nonprofits, either as donors or board members. And then we want to download the names and addresses of millionaires in our community. And I'd like to show you how we do that right now. So about 20 years ago, we went to Experian and we asked them how they process their wealth data. Now, you may have heard of different tools like Wealth Engine and other wealth screening tools that are very expensive, but we learned that we can get the same data from Experian for roughly 12 to 15 cents per record. And that's why we created DonorScope. So I want to show you now where you can have access to these millionaires in your community. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and bring up where DonorScope is housed at NANOE. There are these various buttons on the dashboard. You go down here to the DonorScope directory. And there you go. DonorScope, Transforming Prospect Research. It's a realistic tool that you can use in your communities. You don't need a staff of researchers. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars. You only need to spend several $100s. So there's this upload function that I discussed earlier with your existing file, but there's also the download function that you can use to access millionaires in your radius. Now, will someone unmute themselves, please, and shout out a zip code for me?
01776.
01776. And where is 01776?
It is in Massachusetts, Sudbury.
And what is the nearest? Is it how far is that from Boston or other places?
Probably about 20 miles, maybe.
Okay,
It's
and tell
west
me
of Boston.
west of Boston. Okay, wonderful. And tell me about your mission.
We support families who are raising kids and adults with disabilities through recreation, education, and vacation experiences.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for the impact you're making. Tell me your first name again.
Lottie Diamede.
Lottie, welcome. Okay, well, let's just look at 15 miles of within 15 miles of 01776. I have that correct, right?
Yeah.
Lottie, how many millionaires do you think are within 15 miles of you? Just take a guess.
I would guess, since I live in a very wealthy community around me, I would say maybe 100. I don't know.
Wow.
Probably.
Okay, roughly 100 within 15 miles. All right, so what I've done is in DonorScope, I've selected net worth at $1 million or higher. And I'm going to click View Results now. And let's see how many millionaires. Well, Lottie, you've got 298,000 millionaires within 15 miles of you.
298,000?
Yes.
That's a third.
All right. I'm clearly not doing something right.
Now, that's a lot. So let's narrow this list. That was even higher than I expected. So since we have that many from which we can choose, let's look at yes.
Could I suggest a range for you?
Sure.
What if we did a 5 mile at 10 million and 10 million?
Thank you, Lisa. So Lisa is our member relations director here at NANOE, and Lisa runs these lists all the time. So she's really the expert who can help you run your list. But okay, let's just see. We'll see within 5 miles, Lottie, of you, just within a 5 mile radius, how many people have $10 million in liquid assets plus $10 million in net worth? 8,176.
Unbelievable.
So that's a huge list. So your problem is definitely not capacity, right? We know that anyone who has a net worth of $10 million or greater plus income producing assets of $10 million or greater can absolutely not only give you a major gift every year, but also give you an endowment or plan gift for the long-term viability of your organization. So this is a good problem for you to have. All right, let's do one more zip code. Would someone else give me one more zip code?
97321.
97321 is what I heard. Was that correct?
Yes.
And tell me your first name.
Glenda.
Glenda.
Yes.
And Glenda, tell me where you are.
Albany, Oregon.
Albany, Oregon. Now, is that near Bend or Portland or Salem? Where is that?
It's close to Salem.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So, and tell me, Glenda, about your mission there in Albany, Oregon. Thank you, by the way, for getting up so early. I apologize. We're gonna make some of these later. But tell me about your mission there.
So I work for ABC House. ABC House is a children's advocacy center. We provide child abuse assessment and support services for Lynn and Benton counties in the state of Oregon.
Okay, Glenda, so 2 counties there. How many millionaires do you think are within 15 miles of you?
5?
5. I think I can guarantee a better number than that. 19,000, Glenda.
No.
Now, this is Experian data. Glenda, can you confirm for the group that you and I have never spoken?
Oh yeah, we've never spoken.
And remember, this webinar today is on endowment giving. We are looking for people with a higher amount of net worth and liquid assets so that they can give large legacy gifts to your organization. So I'm going to narrow this, Glenda, at 3 million and higher in a 10-mile radius. There you go, 2,572. So that's a perfect number, actually. That's the number we're always looking for, somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500. Within a 10-mile radius of you, Glenda, people who have a net worth of 3 million and higher and liquid assets of 3 million and higher, 2,572 households. That's wonderful. Don't you think, Glenda?
Absolutely.
Now, if you were to download all of these 2,500 and include available phone numbers and email addresses, now that makes the cost 19 cents per record. And if we do all, you don't have to do all 2,500. You could say, well, I'm just going to do 1,000. But if you wanted to do all 2,572, and you click add to cart, and you only need to do this about once every 3 or 4 years because 2,572 potential donors is a lot. Just waiting for this to process. It's running a little slow. Oh, there it is. You see it there, $488.68. Now, if you decided that you were only going to do 1,000 records, it would only be about $190 plus taxes and things like that. So less than $250. All right. So thank you for letting me pause there to show you Donor Scope, because I want to encourage you, because we often hear from organizations, oh, well, we don't have people in our community who are wealthy. We don't know any millionaires. And here's the thing, you may not know them yet, but they are there. And we find this to be true in every community across the country. Even in rural areas, we will find anywhere from 500 to 1,000 in very rural areas, people who have net worth of $1 million and higher. Now, once we get all these lists together, we're going to invite everyone to a non-fundraising awareness event. A non-fundraising awareness event is a luncheon, a business luncheon that happens on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday from 11:30 to 1. Now, you're very clear on the invitation that it's a non-fundraising awareness event, and you're inviting them to come and hear about the mission and impact of your organization. You may choose to have a special speaker, you may choose to give some awards, but you're creating a compelling program where people can come in the environment of a non-fundraising awareness event and hear about the impact of your organization. Following this non-fundraising awareness event, because at this event, it's a luncheon, you've taken everyone to the mountaintop. They now understand more about the impact of your organization. They've received a copy of your case for support. This is where you roll out case for support publicly for the first time. Now we go into prospect cultivation, which is where we're picking up the phone and we're calling everyone who attended the event or everyone who wanted to attend the event but could not. And we're sitting down and listening to them. We're asking open-ended questions, learning about them, and then asking for their advice, and then inviting them to invest in the organization. this is where all of the work you did in organizational development and case for support, this is where it comes to fruition, because you're able to introduce to them opportunities for them to be involved on an annual basis, on a capital level, and as Tim's going to talk about in a minute, on the endowment side of things. Then at the 1 year mark, so the non-fundraising awareness event was at the 6 month mark. Then at the 1 year mark, 6 months later, you then are going to have an evening ask event. During this 6 months, you've invited people to give, but you've also recruited 25 table hosts. And these 25 table hosts agree to host tables of 8. So you have 200 people in the room for an evening ask event. No bells and whistles, no auction, no band, nothing fancy. You're inviting people in. They have a glass of beer or a glass of wine. They sit down, they have a meal, and then once again, they get to hear about your mission. But this time in this evening, we're going to invite everyone to give. And so everyone has a commitment card, and we ask everyone to fill out the commitment card, and we share with them the good news that we're not going to call out any names, but we are going to do a live tally to learn what we've raised in this evening to impact their communities. Don't worry, we're not going to call out any names, but just fill out this form and hold it up, and we're going to collect it. So we take them through a process that only takes about 15 minutes. We collect these cards, we call out every number. Don't worry, we don't call out names. And then we give a live tally. And typically in these evenings, we raise anywhere from $400,000 to $600,000 just in one night. Then over the course of this year, we've encountered many millionaires and community influencers. We're going to pick the top 15, the top 15 millionaires and community influencers who are going to agree to join our campaign cabinet. Our campaign cabinet is going to agree to take responsibility each for 6 relationships. So if we have 15 people, each agreeing to take responsibility for 6 relationships, that puts us into 90 to 100 campaign interviews, where once again, we get to listen, we get to learn about the person, and then we get to invite them to invest in your organization using the 3-part ask. A gift, a multi-year gift to programs and operations. That's the first part of the ask. 2, the second part is a one-time stretch gift to a capital project. And then 3, the third part of the ask is we invite them to consider our organization in their estate plans for the long-term viability of your impact. This is what Tim is going to talk about in a moment. But I wanted to show you how the endowment ask fits in the overall overall process of donor cultivation. We know that if we make 90 to 100 3-part asks, then we'll get our 50 to 60 yeses, and our 50 to 60 yeses will get us to campaign success, typically anywhere from $5 to $7 million. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we teach the major gifts ramp-up model in this triangle, but if you flip it upside down, it's a funnel. Remember, we started with roughly 2,500 millionaires and community influencers, and now over a period of 18 months, we've funneled down to our top 50 to 60 families who agree to support the organization. Now, I don't want to steal all of Tim's time, but I did want to put this in context for you, and I'd be happy to take 3 questions about the major gifts ramp-up model before we transition specifically to Tim's area of expertise around endowments and planned giving.
Could you repeat the 3-part ask, the steps again?
Yes, and I will also put that in the chat. So the 3-part ask, and this would be in a written format. So in the same way that if you're going to make any major purchase, it's all written down in front of you. We invite you to submit a written proposal to these donors. One is going to be a multi-year commitment to programs or operations. Two is going to be a stretch gift to a capital project, like a renovation or transportation or land or new building or an addition, a new wing. And then three is a commitment to a planned or estate gift.
Thank you. And can I ask another question that kind of interrupts things? And if not, I'll wait.
That's fine, David. Go ahead.
You shared something right before the event asking, the evening asking event about table hosting and 6 table. I didn't quite catch what you meant.
Thank you, David. Yes, I know I was starting to rush because I was eating into Tim's time, so I apologize. Oh, and let me mention that we're going to invite you during this session, if you want to attend a full 2-day conference to learn this model in detail. We're going to share with you how you can get a scholarship code to do that. So I'll be sharing that with you in a few minutes. But to answer David's question, yes, part of that Chapter 8 cultivation process after that non-fundraising awareness luncheon is to invite people to be involved in your organization. You might invite them to give a gift. You might invite them to serve on the campaign cabinet, and or you can invite them to be a table host for the evening event. Now, being a table host doesn't cost anything. There's no price. We're not sponsoring tables. We're not selling tickets. We're asking people to simply invite 6 to 8 couples to join them at their table for this 2-hour evening event. There's no cost to attend. We know that if someone invites 6 to 8 couples, typically they're couples, not always, then you have the couple who's agreed to host the table. They invite 6 to 8 couples. They'll get 3 who are able to attend. That fills a table of 8, and that gives us 25 tables of 8 for 200 people in the room. Is that helpful, David?
It is, yes. It sounded like you were saying get them to host something, meaning like at their home. Now I understand they're hosting their table.
They're
at
hosting
events
their table.
we create.
Yes.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Could I ask a quick question?
Yeah, I've got time for one more, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tim.
Okay, I have a quick question. We've had an ongoing debate within our board on whether we have an executive director before we can bring in somebody to run these type of programs. And so we just kind of spin our wheels and have done nothing. Do you have to have, we've been told that nobody's going to give money without having an executive director. Do we need one first, or can we go with somebody to be doing our outreach, sponsorship, fundraising type of programs?
So leadership is an important criteria for major donors. So you may get smaller gifts to fund your mission, but in order to get major gifts, they're going to want to see that there's a competent professional who is steering the ship. So if I were you, I would be looking for an executive director who is committed to fundraising, capacity building, rather than program service delivery. We can always find somebody to run the programs, but we need an executive director who is the face of the organization in the community and who is out there raising money. You know, the primary job of a president of a college or university is not to run the academics. That's what the provost and the deans do. The primary job of a president of a college or university is to raise money. Now, you may be saying to yourself, we don't have the money to hire an executive director. Well, this is where we would encourage you to have one-on-one conversations with community members so that you can receive restricted gifts to fund at least 2 years of the salary of the executive director.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
All right, Tim, I apologize. I ran 10 minutes longer than I promised you, but I still think you've got plenty of time to cover your material. So I thank you again for being here, and I turn it over to you.
Yeah, one thing, Lewis, I see a question from Jennifer that I think would be good to pick up here, and we'll just lead in. If a nonprofit doesn't have any capital needs, or at least no large ones, can you suggest another option for the three-part ask?
Yeah, so there are instances where you simply are growing your programs for now. Your facilities are in great shape. You don't need additional buildings or land. You don't need any vehicles for transportation. And so in that sense, then you transition to a two-part ask where it's a multi-year gift for operations, and then a planned gift or a state gift to the endowment. So if you really don't have a capital need, it's okay. It then becomes effectively a two-part ask.
I have a question on that. What I had assumed we would do, we're a national organization and all of our team works virtually. We don't need buildings, buses, whatever. So rather than capital, I was thinking we might fund specific projects that people might be interested in. Like there's a big deal for us going on in the state of Michigan right now. And we could zero in on donors that way.
Yeah, thanks, James.
They might be interested in their own stuff as opposed to general.
And that would be another way, another nuance another way to answer Jennifer's question, that if you had a one-time startup cost for a project or a new program, that would be another way to include that in your three-part ask. That's more nuanced, but that is a way to do it.
And the way I come about that is that I think about the normal aspect of managing your nonprofit. It's the ordinary things that you do, but you do them really well, right? All of us are in that mission of doing our mission very, very well. But there's always usually one or two extraordinary things that are kind of, bubbling up every now and then that you say, wow, if we could only do that, that would be the next logical step. And in organizational development, if you can make the moves to get everyone organizationally aligned behind those things, we would add that as a part of the initiative. So that would complete the three-part ask. And almost with every organization that I've run across in my career, there are always certain things like that we say, hey, there's these one or two or three. What usually is the issue is not finding the one thing, but trying to get the 10 things down to the one or two things that need to be accomplished. And so that's a really important aspect of developing is getting that focus that needs to be there. Because if all they see is these 10 things in front of them, they're going to really struggle with that next step. So thank you, Lewis. And it's my pleasure to be able to share with you. And this is something that I like a lot. It's a wonderful presentation. It's going to take some twists and turns, though, and there's going to be some things that maybe you didn't anticipate that lead into endowment that are going to be a fun discussion here. And so let's just get right into it. And let me just share with you, these are the deliverables that we promised you today, is that we would talk about these 5 things, and we're going to jump right into that. So endowment's the beginning or the end, and the endowment game, in essence, as what we're discussing here. And the 5 points in our presentation, and they'll be in the following slides here, so I'm not going to repeat them. But let's just talk for a few moments about donors and an endowment fund. Most donors are looking for a means to do something bigger than themselves. And so what we're trying to do is, in essence, work with your current constituency, and I would challenge you to think about this, is to ask them the question or try to get into conversations with them about things that they can do that are bigger than themselves. Because most people that we're engaged with and having regular conversations with them they're not thinking of themselves as something very significant. And if we can bring them into our mission to help them to see that you are very significant, and sometimes it's the widow that gives $15 a month that is the prime candidate for this kind of thing. They may be just looking to see, are you willing to have a relationship with me? Are you willing to listen to me in certain instances where they're asking for a relationship, and we're being challenged to take that next step and make that happen with them. People tend to be forgotten in 2 generations. It's a reality that I was in a presentation not long ago, and I'm not sure I fully agree with this philosophy, but the gentleman says, you know, when do you really die? When do you really die? People think, oh, you naturally when I die, but his proposal is you really die when the last person says your name. And you can go on for decades and even generations. And many of us have some little gene in us to think, you know, when I'm on this earth, I really want to make a difference. I really want to have something to show for what I've done. And so an endowment is a really easy way that we can introduce to almost, you know, any person to help them to say, you know, I don't want to be one of those forgotten. I want to be one of those that is remembered in some form or fashion. And so what natural way is to connect me to my alma mater or to connect me to those various organizations in my community that are really making a difference, that maybe I have a passion that's in myself that is brought out. And the person that usually is responsible to bring that out is you. You're in the unique position to build a relationship with that donor and to try to help them realize something that that they have inside them. And so legacy is very important to most people. And in one of the recent conversations I had with a particular donor, it was a real clue to me in the conversation. He says, you know, I happened to go to the local cemetery, and there was some really popular cemetery. And he says, I actually have a lot that I've purchased in this cemetery, and there's a cemetery tour there. And it occurred to me that I want to make sure that I'm on the cemetery tour, and at some point or another, and the things that I've accomplished, the things that I've done, so that I would be a noteworthy individual. So it's kind of a private goal that he was sharing with me. And he says that the difficulty with that is, as I began to talk with them, they says, you know, in order to get on our cemetery tour, you have to be dead for at least 50 years. And then you can be a part of our cemetery tour. And it's like, well, how do I make the connection? Because I'm here now and they're there 50 years from now. And so there's naturally has to be some things that occur. And so I think an endowment is a way to be on the quote cemetery tour today. And it's a significant means to allow you to do something significant to connect your mission to a donor. Endowments give donors a means to express the passion for your impact forever. And so we're in a position to really make that happen. And let's continue on the journey here. So what is an endowment? Endowment is a donation to a nonprofit which uses the investment income for a specific purpose. Okay. I was in a meeting not too long ago, and they were having some really big debates about, does this really constitute an endowment or not? And what I did is I reminded them in that meeting that in many instances, an endowment is simply a restriction on a gift. And it's a restriction that's characterized in a certain way. So when you have a hard time putting it in a box, and if you're like me, you're always working with people who are CPAs and people that are very legalistic in their approach of looking at things. And if sometimes you can just break it down to say, really what we're talking about here is a certain type of restriction. And how can we bring about this restriction in a positive way that everyone's going to embrace it and want to move forward? So typically that restriction is either a permanent restriction or a quasi or board controlled restriction. And so in the embodiment of this document that we usually put together, and I'll be sharing in a few moments how we put together an endowment, we're putting language in this document that says that this is permanently restricted, or this is not permanently restricted. It's quasi-endowment where a board can control it and release certain restrictions based upon contingencies that are put in the plan. And most boards, most leadership individuals are looking for ways that they can have more of a quasi-endowment, if they can have that, because it gives them the ability to maneuver and to truly lead in given situations. And so I'm going to give you an example of charity, and this is a quote, and it's not on my screen here, but charity begins where certainty ends. And so one thing that I like to talk to leadership about is that you can't have donors that are out there that want to overly control. And this is one thing you want to be careful with endowments, is not to get donors into a position where they become the CEO of the organization. Charity begins where certainty ends. So you really want to develop a culture within your charity in such a way that you're not taking away the ability for the leadership to lead. Okay. Now I'm going to contradict myself a little bit later on that, because certainly donors have desire to do certain things, but what we want to do is create a culture that everyone values so much within the sphere of that charity that they are really getting behind the leadership, and they trust the leadership, and they are vowing their allegiance to that leadership through their giving. And that's always a healthy thing that we want to do. And typically endowments are perpetual gifts, so they go on from now until forever. I'm going to give some examples about that in a minute. I've also set up endowments that are a gift over a period of years. For instance, we start out at, the beginning, 120, 119, 118, 117. And so this is typically a donor that maybe isn't quite ready for the full forever kind of thing, but they're willing to trust you enough to say, I want to do something and do it in this fashion, and start out in this manner. And I've often seen donors that start with something like this, and after it gets down to 1-1, they go, oh, it's kind of like, what am I going to do now? I have to continue to do something. And that is many times a trigger point for an additional conversation to say, okay, well, what about the forever? And what's the opportunity for that? And a single endowment can actually benefit multiple purposes within your organization. So if someone has, a particular interest in scholarships, plus they want to do something for faculty or do something else for operations, we can embody that in the endowment as we're putting those pieces together. And then how much is needed? How much is enough? I was just working with a particular donor yesterday, and it was in a child sponsorship program. And originally when it was designed to sponsor 3 children. Well, they just made a significant $20,000 gift at the end of the year. And in doing that $20,000 gift, it more than sponsors 3 children. And so now we have an opportunity for a conversation to say, how about increasing that? Or, maybe we should sponsor 4 or 5. And actually we have language within the document that says that when this donor passes away, not only does this endowment take over with their sponsorship, but it in fact would sponsor more children. And so it's already kind of provided for, but at this point in time, when I was talking with the particular donor, they said, well, I'm just not ready to go with another sponsorship yet. So that was the answer at that moment. And many times as we're putting together endowments, an institution will have a minimum, and the common minimum that we run into is around $25,000, although I've worked with organizations that said no, 50,000 is our number. Some of them I've worked with that we come up with some real creative ways. And if you just want to give a few $1,000s, we'll set it up in kind of a designated fund, and then say, okay, we need to get it to this level. And as soon as we get it to this level, then we'll consider this to be a full endowment. And this really helps. And your accounting people will love this, because it doesn't put you into a structure immediately, right, where you're making promises that you can't fulfill. So you set it up into a designated fund within your organization, and through that designated fund, then you can encourage the growth to get to the minimum. So I've worked with many donors over the years where we start out even with $500, $1,000. I've had people make payments towards their endowment like they're making a house payment. And it's a beautiful thing to watch that move forward.
Can I just ask a question before you move on to that again?
Sure.
Just so I'm understanding it correctly, and maybe I'm not super smart about this, but I know that you said the endowment should be 25,000 or more. And then you also are going back to saying that somebody could start with 500, 1,000. By starting it small, because I'm thinking in my organization, that's where we would rather be more successful, at least to begin with. The difference between the 5,000 and the 25,000, is that just merely saying the endowment is sort of set up correctly when it's 25,000 versus 5,000? Am I asking the question correctly?
Yeah, Well, what I would do is start out with a document that is an actual a document that we would hope to fund at some point in the future. But before we get to that, that's kind of like the goal, and we have that established uh, as a plan. But it can't be fully funded until we hit the organizational requirement.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep.
Mhm. And so they could fund that through their estate and an estate designation, a number of different ways that they could come about doing that. So great question. Thank you.
Yeah, so you're saying the endowment would be to some specific area, and that's where that's where the number comes in.
Yeah, you have to deal with your internal team to say, what's realistic and how can we possibly do this. But before I go too far, I'll just say in a minute, I'm going to tell you that if you don't do it, they'll engage with other organizations that will do it for your organization or in spite of your organization. And so
No,
that's
I
where you want to be.
understand.
Yeah, right. It's good. All right. Thanks for the
Tim, I
question.
have a question, just
Sure.
a sort of overall question. Our organization, we're at about $1 million, but it's very expensive to do what we do. We provide free legal aid to people all across the country for basically, well, what we do is it's for people that are opposed to unions. So we're doing cases for them all over the country. Well, how do you know when it's time to, because we need operating money more than we need endowment right now, but how do you know when it's a good time to, in other words, if somebody's going to give you money, I'd rather have it for operations. Because that's what we do.
Yeah. And so that's part of the genius of the three-part ask, James. And thanks for that question. Is that what I've learned over my career is that there are people that have more of an interest in supporting your ministry or charity or whatever it is in such a way that they know that that's an option. They're looking for that option more so. So many leadership that we're running into, I would agree. We would almost all raise our hands and say, yes, we want that gift this year for operations. But the reality is this donor is looking for the long game. And there's certain donors that I've encountered over the years only give towards endowment. But the organizations are putting them on the sideline because they really don't have an option for them to give consideration to. Yeah.
I guess I'm thinking, how much do you need to get in your operating budget before you really like to have endowment? I mean, I like that both, don't get me wrong, but
yeah. And part of building case for support is developing that budget that you're speaking about. So then we would sit with you and say, okay, what are the components? How do we, make sense? And and it's interesting to see how that plays out. The best option might be to actually figure out a way to fund operations in the future through endowment. So that's a long-term strategy. And most of what we're doing here, this is the long game, is what we're looking for. And many major donors are looking to see if the charity does have a long game. Because if you don't have a long game, then that obviously answers a lot of questions as to whether or not you deserve their support. You follow me?
yeah, that's an interesting thought.
Okay, a well-planned endowment campaign can fund your future. So as we're moving forward here, we're talking about, and this is really speaking directly to where James was at, is we're looking at annual fund, we're looking at capital needs, and then most of that vision is it's real centric to the vision of your current annual fund needs. So as you're expressing your case for support and you're developing that desire, that need that everyone sees and everyone gets behind to say, we need to be doing these things and more of it, then usually we'll try to spin that off and down into various endowments as people share those ideas with us. Like I was sharing a minute ago, it's a tragedy if you don't have a vision for this, because sometimes people will establish endowments that are off from that. A case in point, I've run into this in a number of places where people have an international purpose and they go on the other side of the world to Africa and they see a really exciting thing and they think, okay, I'm going to endow that. I'm going to really make a difference. I've seen for my own eyes how this is going to impact things, but they haven't really engaged with the leadership of the organization. And so here's an opportunity, like I was sharing with James, where the leadership can rise to the occasion and say, here's how you can focus your gifts and really make a difference. And that is what I've seen many times, and I've dealt with a lot of organizations that sometimes even hate endowments because they didn't have the leadership to get in front of this whole curve in such a way that they can craft a well put together program so that everyone's working together and fitting all the various needs of the puzzle of your given organization. So that's the thing I would challenge you to be careful about and be leery of those situations. Another great thing as you're talking to your accounting people is that these are books that can be booked today. But if they go through some other means where there's some sort of a contingency, according to GAAP accounting, you cannot book that asset. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build financial strength within your organization so that even though the dollars are restricted in such a way that they're only going to pay out so much in a given year from now into the future, you know that you can still book this as an asset and it builds financial strength, specifically when you're trying to do major capital projects. If you are in fact borrowing some money to do major things within your organization, you want to have assets like this that you can book. Even things like charitable remainder trusts, which I'll talk about in a few more slides, are great tools, even though you're not going to get the money now, but you can book them as an asset if they're properly put together. The three-part ask and endowment should support all aspects of the giving. So that's what we try to do, is make sure all these things are congruent and we're all working together and pushing in the same direction to make this happen. Endowment giving does not necessarily compete with annual fund and capital needs. So like I was sharing with James just a few moments ago, if the vision is there and it needs to be very clearly articulated, it has to make a lot of sense and how it's being put together. And that's part of just developing a really good, strong case for support. Then it makes a lot of sense. So endowments are, again, influenced by your vision of your organization, making sure that the key leadership are on board and they're really making it happen. Your vision impacts what donors may do. And like I said, donors can do endowments with you. And so whose vision is best, the donor or the CEO? And we'd like to make that an and, not an or. I think it's really important. But as leadership changes, that's another dynamic that we have to deal with. And I'm going to speak to an example of that in just a moment as well. And endowments can fund almost anything. You know, I've had people that have created things that say, I just don't want them to worry about this kind of thing and for forever. You know, this maintenance issue or making sure that buildings are properly presenting themselves for the organization to give a good front face as to what the organization looks like to the community. So all kinds of things can be endowed depending on the needs of the organization. So what I want to do is I want to share a story with you. This is a real story of an individual that I've worked with probably for the last almost 30 years, actually. And I call it Don's story. Don was a successful CEO of a major organization, nonprofit organization, and he did a number of successful campaigns. It was an organization that was kind of in a ragtag area, very low population, in essence, a very low budget. In fact, when Don first came, many of the staff of this particular organization made around $15,000 a year. A lot of them were given certain benefits because they lived on the facility, on the campus, and various ways. And so there was a lot of work for Don to do. But over the course of his over 30 years of being there, a lot of great things occurred. They struggled with annual funds. So in some instances, they had the ability to come up with capital projects because that was kind of the shiny thing. But when they were coming up with annual funds, they really struggled with that. And I would often talk to Don because a lot of what he was doing in his initiatives is he was doing what I would say getting tips from donors. He was more into the mass appeal of doing donor development. He would send out emails. He would send out letters, appeals. He would do the things that you typically see, the bake sales and the selling the candy with the students, and it was an educational institution. But I would always come back to Don and say, Don, you're going for tips. You're spending a lot of time doing all kinds of stuff that are really just netting you a lot of work. And so this was an ongoing conversation that I had with him. Of course, I mentioned to you the staff compensation issues. One day, actually, Don had come to my home and he was staying with me, and he was really laboring over the next season of the organization and the articles of incorporation and bylaws, because in his mind, he came to me and he said, Tim, if I can get these articles of incorporation and bylaws fixed the way they ought to be, I can see the trajectory of this organization really shifting and making a difference forever. And when he said forever, I thought, he's looking in the wrong place. Because if you're with me on this, you realize that almost any other CEO could come in behind him, board of directors, and change these articles of incorporation and bylaws to maybe a certain extent. And the legacy that he was looking, and he had a great legacy. He'd built some great buildings, done some great things, but still had some needs in the annual fund area. And guess what? He didn't have any endowment. And so I began to talk to Don and help Don to say, you know what? Again, these things could all be changed that you're really sweating over. But if you were to put together an endowment campaign, and in that endowment campaign, embody the very values that you believe have taken you to the next level organizationally, you could go out and talk to these same people that have funded these capital projects and begin to talk to them about endowment so that you could endow the future. And be assured that these things that you're trying to put in to these bylaws of the organization could very easily be reinforced forever. And your legacy of what you're trying to create within this organization will be assured. I love that story because it really helps you to see the various dynamics, because the reality is that for many, many years, Don did not believe in endowment. And in fact, I even went on a trip with him internationally to look at some other charities and their operation. And we were in India, of all places. And I talked to him about some of these concepts in the early 2000s. And we debated in the midst of that. But suddenly when he got to the place where he realized that, you're right, all these things I'm pushing for, yeah, the buildings are great. They are a legacy, but really truly endowment. And so it was not long after that that he raised very quickly about $6 million for endowment. And it was one of the last things he wanted to do before he actually transitioned to another organization. So great example of just trying to help if you can get the leadership in the right place. And that goes back to what Lewis was sharing earlier about organizational development. One of the reasons we want to share that model with you is that most generally when you can't raise money, it comes down to two things. It comes down to organizational development, getting all the right people pushing in the right direction, and it comes down to asking the right people for the gift. And those two things are things that if we can address those, many times we have a very successful initiative. It doesn't matter if you're talking about annual fund or capital needs or endowment, they're all going to be the same. Lewis, did you want to chime in with anything there?
Oh no, I'm sorry. I just turned my camera back on.
Okay. All right. So another aspect of managing endowment is developing an investment policy. So hopefully we won't go into lots of in-depth discussion about an investment policy, but we should all have investment policies for our organization for various purposes, and endowment is no different. And part of the board governance, managing assets is really important. And so we want to make sure that that is part of the plan, and the board's involved and they've approved that. Again, most people are forgotten in 2 generations, so we're looking to try to fix that problem, and so that's all being discussed as a part of that. Legacy is important to many donors, and I guess I'm repeating myself on this particular slide. Managing endowments. We're looking at restricted funds, like we mentioned earlier. Many times it's worth having a conversation about endowment versus reserves. So you want to make sure you have enough reserves. In many instances, what we're doing is we're actually adding the reserves as possibly a capital project. Just dealing with another organization in the last few days where they're a camping organization. They're now in a really difficult position because here we are in February. All their campers don't start to arrive until closer to June. And so they are adding into their campaign a plank for reserves. And that's how we would approach that. Making sure we have policies. With most endowments, as we're putting those policies together, we have a total return payout on a 3-year average return, 3-year average balance, excuse me. So what we're doing is we're taking the average of the 3-year balance of the endowment, and we're multiplying usually something like 3 to 5% of that value, and that is the value that would be paid out each year for the specific purpose that is there. Some organizations might have a little higher percentage, but I really like the smoothing effect that occurs on a 3-year average balance on an endowment. And this is another pitfall that you might run into regarding endowments, because I've run into organizations where because of their investment policy, because of the way that they've managed their endowment, they have had years, perhaps it was like last year or maybe the year before, when the market is down, and they have actual loss of earnings within the fund. And because of those loss of earnings, the balance is actually lower than it was the year prior. And so they may not have anything to pay out for endowment. And then that may be the exact year that they need the funds. And so having the 3-year average in there really does make a difference in making that easier for you. And so, of course, everyone's looking for the charitable distributions and want to see that happen. And that's the exciting part about putting together endowments. Another aspect of distributions is we sometimes put together programs where it's only the income. Sometimes it's income plus principal. Sometimes it involves a field of purpose of where the board can then decide what the output would be from that, similar to what we were saying, quasi type of endowment. So keep in mind, we were talking earlier about endowments are just a form of a restriction on the gift. And so it can actually be used in various different ways. I've even established endowments where the family has an input. Of course, you have to be really careful when you're doing these kinds of things to make sure that that really matches your ability to work with that donor, to work with that family, and make sure that we're accomplishing things the way that they would want them to be accomplished. Other ways of looking at restrictions would be through scholarships. So just for educational purposes, to bear the family name on a particular scholarship. I work with donors that have had more or less a doctrine of the way that they want things to be distributed. They may work within geography or a specific purpose, such as for educational purposes or healthcare purposes. It might align to the values of the family. And then some donors just simply want to preserve the flexibility in making change or having the board control it based upon the board's needs in the future. And so now we want to transition and talk a little bit about some of the instruments that fund endowments. And your familiarity with these instruments is something that you just want to really personally roll up your sleeves and professionally get involved in. So if you don't have a means, for instance, to do bequests within your organization, usually bequests are a starting point for the discussion of endowments. So making sure that you understand how to process and support people with wills and trusts. And if you don't have like a person within your community or on your board that can help you to build a bequest program, we would encourage you to consider that. And that's one thing that we talk to people and help people to establish. And that's usually a major starting place for building endowment, because as Lewis said earlier, it's nothing to put 5%, 10%. Just worked with someone yesterday that put 50% of their estate into an estate planning document, a living trust that is going to go to endowment. And so having those structures in place so you can do that, and even just being able to help facilitate that and help direct a donor, or maybe have an initial conversation where you have a planning sheet organizationally where you're gathering the information, that'll be another aspect of that and doing that. I have worked with countless donors that have entered into charitable remainder unit trusts because they are looking to avoid the capital gains on the sale of a given asset. And I'll mention this a little bit more and how it works. But in many instances, they don't even care what the end charity is. They just want it to be something that is significant, that they certainly align themselves with. And so I, again, run into many donors that say, Tim, I just trust you. You're telling me I just want the charitable remainder trust. I want to sell the apartment complex and know that I don't have to pay the recapture of depreciation plus, any other appreciation that might be on that asset. And so, in working that, we've got a marriage made in heaven to do that. IRA designations. There's a lot of opportunity these days in IRAs. Those of you who are not involved in doing the qualified charitable distribution, the QCDs, with QCDs, people readily have dollars in their retirement plan that if they don't take them, they're going to be penalized for not taking them. So they're needing to take the minimum distributions. It's not uncommon for many of our people in our constituency to not be spending those dollars. And in fact, these are dollars that they're willing to give to you. And if you don't understand how that works, we would encourage you to explore that conversation further to see. And then not only while they're living, but after they have passed, we'll set up charitable remainder trusts to hold the IRA. And if you don't know, a few years ago, the law passed or changed such that retirement plans have to be paid out in at least 10 years. They couldn't be spread out much longer. And so one of the nice things about a testamentary charitable remainder unit trust is through a testamentary charitable remainder unit trust, you can spread that income out for family members for as many as 20 years after mom and dad are gone. And that beats the 10-year rule. And then again, in that same instance, they get so much more tax savings because they're not being taxed as much on that retirement plan upfront. And they many times don't care as much as to who the charity is at the end. So if you're the one that can introduce that concept to them, then you're the one that's going to benefit from that. In a few minutes, I'm also going to talk about donor advised funds and how they can be used as we're moving along with developing endowment. This is just a quick example for you on how a charitable remainder trust works for your organization. In this situation, you could pick any number that you want to pick. And again, I just gave an example for how it would work with an IRA for children. In this particular situation, it really doesn't matter who the beneficiary is. I'm giving an example of a lifetime, one lifetime. It could be one lifetime. It could be 2 lives. It could be 20 years certain, like I explained with the IRA, which is usually what we would do with the IRA example. In this situation, you see how there's a property that is appreciated. And by putting it into the charitable remainder unit trust, we avoid the gain on the sale of that asset. And instead of having to pay a tax on the gain, the donor in this situation walks away with a $500,000 deduction. They also get income for the rest of their lives at $50,000 a year. Based upon this particular person's current age, the software calculated and said that their estimated life expectancy is 21 years. That's what that means. And in this situation, the net result of a 5% unit trust, given an average rate of return, would be $1.3 million. I mean, let's see a raise of hands. How many people would love to see a gift of $1.3 million come into your initiatives, to your endowment, to your annual fund, unrestricted? I mean, and this is something that the donor decides, right, as to how it's going to be done. But then you're given the opportunity, because you're the one introducing the idea and the concept to them, to be able to help them to do this. They're many times going to come back to you and say, hey, James, what do you recommend? What would you like to see me do? And this is where true leadership can be true leadership. I mentioned briefly about bequests of an IRA. Really important. Keep in mind that IRAs are income waiting to happen. And next to a person's real estate, an IRA is many times the second largest, if not the largest asset that you'll run into. And when you look at the donor scope information, the reason you're seeing more and more millionaires in your community is because they're living in homes that are worth twice what they were worth 10 years ago in some instances. They also have IRAs and retirement plans, 401ks, 403b plans that have greatly appreciated in the market, and they're continuing to make significant contributions to those plans. So to get to $1 million is really not as big as it used to be. I don't know how to make it sound different because we all grew up, right, with the whole idea is like, you know, they're a millionaire. You know, this particular family is a millionaire. Well, being a millionaire these days is not what it used to be. And so we have to start to think in those concepts as we're trying to build our mission and raise funds for our organization. Now, here's the fun part, and I bet most people haven't thought about this, but a donor advised fund can be a training wheels for endowment. And in fact, I have seen this played out over and over again. I'm going to give you an example of how that has worked out. So we need to look at building partnerships and relationships with those groups in our community foundations, donor advised funds that are working within your sphere, because donor advised funds are a huge thing. And many times, if you can get a donor to start out with a donor advised fund, that donor is many times a candidate for an endowment. And so maybe if you guys are on your video screens, how many of you have received gifts from donor advised funds? Is there anyone out there that you're not getting gifts from donor advised funds? That's a huge area of philanthropy. In fact, the largest charity in America now is the Fidelity Gift Fund. And why are they the largest charity? Because they give the most options, the most flexibility of any organization does to make a charitable gift now and then decide later in how that gift is going to be fully utilized and distributed. So they get a deduction for making that gift now. And then they have this fund that then they have granting privileges from that fund to make distributions to all kinds of things. And very few charities that I'm running into really think about this in that way, is that they'll take in a stock, for instance, helping a donor take in a stock, not realizing in every stock gift I get, I always talk to the donor about, do you realize you could set up a donor advised fund? We could harvest the growth of stocks like this on a regular basis. And by you being the individual that helps them understand the value of a donor advised fund and the ability to do that, and sometimes I refer to it as a charitable checkbook. And I'll say, hey, do you have a charitable checkbook? And they'll say, what do you mean a charitable checkbook? Well, it works like this. And I explain the concept of a donor advised fund and how it works. And so, especially in the way our taxes work now, with the exemptions being so much higher than they used to be, and many people are not able to use their charitable deductions in a given year, we run into donors that are grouping their charitable gifts into a given year and then using donor advised funds to make distributions over the next 1, 2, or 3 or 4 years. Or they'll take a significant life event, such as the sale of a property or an asset that is highly appreciated, and then they'll use that to establish a donor advised fund. And so there's all kinds of ways to work with donor advised funds. But the big question that we have to think about is that what is the donor going to do with that donor advised fund when they pass away? In many situations, depending on the donor advised fund, they have not processed through the possibility of what they could do with that donor advised fund after they're gone. And I've run into organizations who hold donor advised funds and they are just simply left undesignated. And unless you have a policy or some procedure, in which you should have some policy and procedure on how to handle that after the donor has passed away. So if you have a donor advised fund in your charity, it's a great way to take the next step to open doors in this particular area. All kinds of places to look to manage donor advised funds. Timing. So, we're talking about getting in front of them at the time that they want to maybe sell a piece of property. So, to note as you're meeting with particular donors that they're getting ready to possibly sell something at a particular time, make sure you put that information down, and so that you can circle back with them at the appropriate time. And so in this situation, I'm just highlighting then that with donor advised funds, there's certain things that have to happen. So you have to be engaged with a public charity that manages the funds. So if you're not in a position of doing a donor advised fund, there are a lot of other public charities that are out there that can help you with that. Typically, it's the donor or the donor's family that makes recommendations. You can pass those recommendations down in many instances to other family members using a type of a proxy format where you say, well, I die, then my son or my daughter or my friend could be the person that could make designations from this fund. Again, we want to continue this in such a way that they're staying connected to you and your mission. And then ultimately, again, this becomes a possible future endowment. The last point I want to mention here is that setting up a donor advised fund can be a window into a larger picture of the donor's giving. So if you're the one that introduces this concept to them, and even if you have your own donor advised fund within your organization, then it's through that that you might be able to help them with all of their giving. So using the Fidelity Gift Fund example, if you help them set it up, you would then, all they have to do is put you on the account with them, and then you can assist them along the way. So if they're giving to their alma mater, they're giving to their church, they're giving to your mission, then you're a trusted advisor in that process of assisting them. So being on the front end of that is a real key opportunity for you. I'd like to share with you an example of this. I call it Sylvester's story, and this is actually a true story. And we really struggled in working, and everyone has this kind of thing where a donor has a particular idea or a concept, and as you listen to that idea and you think, Sylvester, this is never going to work. And in this particular situation, Sylvester came to us and no one would accept the gift. And it came to find out that in the midst of this, Sylvester had talked to 7 or 8 different charities by the time he had gotten to us. And we didn't know that initially, but finally I had have you ever talked to anyone else about this? And he said, yeah, actually you're number 8. And they had all, subsequently said no. And it had to do with a scholarship that he wanted to create. And the key element to this is like say, okay, let's do this, Sylvester. Let's start a donor advised fund. And in starting that donor advised fund, we started working out all the mechanics in putting together this scholarship. And the way that it was involved is there were several charities involved in it. If you could imagine pulling several charities together to do a common scholarship, it almost sounds like a train wreck, right? It's just not going to happen. So we eventually got it to a place where because we were the ones that engaged with him in having this conversation, that he wanted to continue the conversation. And so we were able to test fly it. And I'm pleased to report to you, because we have been negotiating through this, because with a donor advised fund, there's very little restriction. And so we could be very nimble at changing various aspects. One particular organization ended up rising to the occasion. And because of that, we were able to grab onto that. And the scholarships ended up benefiting students that go to multiple institutions. Again, if you can just imagine, it's kind of a train wreck of an idea, but we're now in the position where we have ownership at various levels, and Sylvester is now beginning to step back, and we have a governing document that enables us to take the next step. So, so my encouragement to you is be creative or lose the gift. And in this situation, you can get a donor to come on to your side if you use the tools in the way that they should be put together and designed to be used. Which takes me to the next step, and we're kind of wrapping things up here. And I wanted to just share with you briefly an example with this particular charity's approval of this is an application that they use to put together endowments. This is some basic information about them, and their minimum you'll see there in the second paragraph down is a $20,000 minimum. What does it cost? There's no fees to establish this. And so a nice little brief, and of course they had this on nice paper, and it was well designed, and I just kind of lifted the text for you to be able to see for the purposes of this presentation. These are some of the basic constructs of putting together an endowment, and this could be in a nice little brochure or a fold out that you put together organizationally. Here's the exact account, what we would call a new endowment form. So we're gathering the basic information. that we need from the donor, and then key questions that we like. These are the major handles that we use for establishing endowments, because once you get someone talking about themselves and their mission and how they want to impact your community through your charity, and so, why do you wish to establish this endowment? Is there a particular person you're trying to honor or memorialize? These are just great key questions that take you the next step. How many years have you been associated with this organization? How'd you become acquainted? So we're just looking at all different little angles to better understand. And I tell donors as I'm working with them, anything you give me on this end file, I want to know one of two things. Is this something that I can share with another person? If it's something that I can share with another person, I put that in one side of the file folder. And if this is just purely confidential for us only, let me know that, and I'll put it on this side of the folder or in a separate folder completely. And what I find is that people load up the side where they want people to know a little bit about them. And if they don't, I many times will facilitate that conversation by saying, we have scholarship recipients where their lives have been changed by your endowment, for instance. They just want to know a little bit more about you. And what are some things that you'd be willing to share? And every time I'm circling back with a donor, usually trying to reaffirm a larger gift for that endowment, I'll circle back on this particular question, and they'll usually spill out just a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And you don't know what that means to the recipient of that endowment or that scholarship as much. And again, it's part of building that relationship. In this particular example, they can do multiple designations. And so we make that available to them there if they have different things that they want to benefit, or if it's an organization that has, you know, the ability to support other organizations, then that can be done here as well. So we would obviously customize this form. And here's the one document now, after we've gathered all this information and put it into that folder about all those personal things that are unique to this particular individual and how they relate to that organization. This is just a skeleton that we use to begin to fill in and say, here's some of those basic things. So this opening paragraph might be 2 or 3 paragraphs, for instance, when we're all done. And these are the short form, and I've got, well, now you can use AI, right? And you put it in AI and you put all this blah and you say, get this down to 100 words or 50 words or 25 words. And you can use that as a starting place and put that in there. And that's a great tool to do that. And I just did that last night for a particular family. And I was amazed of the results of how that turned out. And so specifically, distribution shall be made in equal shares to, and so that language is there. Notice the first bullet, it says, in this particular example, this is a permanent endowment that shall be held and managed by Delmarva Council in this particular example. So that is an example of an actual declaration. And we're going to open it up now to questions that you have. In fact, we're going to go off sharing here too. And it's open mic time.
Okay, I have a question. Who legally sets up the endowments and how is that managed?
That would be established by the policies of your given institution, but usually it's in conjunction with top leadership and policies that have been set by your board. So if you're going to actually be the ones that manage your endowment program, you want to have the investment policy in place, right? And you want to maybe have a basic policy and guidelines that you would have available that would be approved by your board on how all the various nuances are handled. And that's something that, we can work with you on establishing that. Usually there's a money manager involved in that. So it's someone maybe affiliated with your board. If you don't have that kind of structure or not willing to put that kind of structure together, there's lots of other organizations out there that, like community foundations, that will work you to help you bridge a gap until you can get to the place where you can do that kind of thing. And they'll probably readily, share some of their examples as well for you that you might want to consider.
I have a question, just a general one. Is there an opportunity that any of you are aware of to really learn more about the intricacies of all of these ways by which money flows into charities. Like, I never heard of the word uni-trust before this meeting. I would really like to understand more about charitable distributions and how to form things like our organization's own DAF. I'm just wondering, is that something that's a topic for future or past trainings?
So, David, the best way to handle that would be to schedule a call with Tim so he can review your questions directly. So if you send Tim a direct message, then he can respond. Just send your email, and then he can respond and set up a call with you.
Thank you.
Happy-
No, I appreciate
Yeah.
that. I was just wondering too, is for everyone generally, if that's something you ever have considered offering, like this.
There are a
But-
lot of organizations that provide plan giving education in various forms and fashion. And you know, like I use School of Philanthropy if you just really want to, I mean, like that's like that's the top notch, high flying, there's other organizations as well, but we also do that on a more one-on-one basis and helping people to better, and usually just starting that conversation where you're at now. And there's various things that you can do that are online too, that will help you to process information, that help you with plan giving.
Thank you. I plan on emailing you soon, Tim.
That'd be great, David.
I have a question. I don't know if I might have missed it in your presentation, Tim, but could you go into the structure of foundations supporting organizations? We're actually talking to an attorney about that today, and I was just looking for pros and cons.
You're a supporting organization, Karen, or are you
No,
figuring
we
out-
have a charitable 501c3, but they're wanting to build an endowment without tipping themselves into private foundation mode. So they're looking at creating perhaps a supporting organization for endowment money to go into.
Yeah, it's very unusual to see that an organization like that would be tipped. There's what's called a public support test that you have to be looking at. How old is your organization, Karen?
It's only 5 years old,
Okay, so you're
but
in
it's
that.
got one donor.
Oh, wow. Okay. Hmm. Um, so the concern would be there's a hesitancy for people to make gifts to you because of the fact that you might be considered a private foundation in the near future, right?
Well, that could be that could be a concern because the
Yeah,
the donor is wanting to actually transfer 10% of their corpus. It's another foundation, so it's a wealth transfer. But the amount of funds is just going to automatically tip this charity into being a private foundation, and then of course it can't lobby. It'll have a more difficult time raising funds. But if it creates this supporting organization, which I really don't know much about right now,
yeah.
that organization could gift out from the endowment to the charity.
Right. Yeah, what Karen's dealing with here is that the IRS has tests that say that they're really looking for charities as they mature to develop a broad base of donors. And this is a strong, compelling reason for our model, because what you're trying to do is push against that. If Karen, if your organization doesn't quickly get more donors, then you could end up becoming a private foundation. So the IRS has this test, and they just want to see a lot of donors making, significant gifts. And it's kind of a complex calculation in doing that. And I'm not sure I could really answer your question, Karen, without knowing a little bit more about what your challenge is with. You might be able to use a lot of other tools that would help you versus a supporting organization. A supporting organization is a subset of the primary charity.
Okay.
And so in being a supporting organization, I'm not sure that's a fix to your problem that you're dealing with.
Okay.
I need to explore that a little bit more with you, but the end result is we all want as charities to have a lot of people making smaller, significant gifts to us. And it just shows a basic concept of public support. Having one donor as your major benefactor without that support behind him, in the eyes of the IRS, that's a negative. And that's what they're looking to kind of smack your hands if they can at some point in the future and make it harder for you. And that's unfortunate, the way that works, but it's just it's their way of trying to make you healthy, if I can say that, you know. And what I mean by healthy is having lots of donors making contributions to you and that kind of thing. So it's an opportunity, you know, fully understand. If you want to visit about that, I'd be more than glad to talk with you. And your solution might actually be a donor advised fund. I don't know.
All right, thank you.
Tim, I'm gonna break in and use this opportunity to thank everyone. Apologize. I've got to go to work on an advancement calendar with an organization, laying out their 18-month plan. I'm going to leave you in the good hands of Tim and Lisa to continue the discussion. I'm also putting in the chat my email. So if you want a scholarship to a 2-day Major Gifts Ramp Up Conference where we cover things in detail, just email me and I'll send that to you. Tim, thanks for being gracious. That was a great presentation, and thanks for taking over as I depart.
No problem. We got you, Lewis.
Okay. All right. Great to see everybody. Have a great day. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, everybody.
I see all kinds of things in the chat, and my apologies to each of you who have put stuff there, but Lisa, maybe you could help guide me a little bit. I'll take Scott, I see your hand. I'm just going to take your question next, and hopefully it's one of the ones that's in the chat. My apologies. Go for it.
Yeah, Lewis touched on my comment in the chat. We're a small rural 501c3 humane society, no-kill facility, but there are a lot of financial resources. There are people with multi-million-dollar vacation homes that don't live here year-round, but and so there's an opportunity here. I know that I'm missing, but we being so small and not having the capacity or the insight up front to be able to organize to create our own foundation. We use a local community foundation where there are donor advised funds that are set aside in there. There's also restricted funds set aside where we just do the interest off, and there are unrestricted funds there. And I think probably one of my challenges now, until we can get to a point to do this on our own independently, is to encourage these folks to start dumping money at the community foundation. Is that something you would recommend, or do you think that we should go right ahead and start our own?
I would always at least explore initially your capacity to do some of these things. Not to say, because I don't know what small means. Tell me what kind of organization you are.
We're a humane society, a traditional nonprofit, no-kill humane society. Our budget's about $500,000.
Does that $500,000 come from donations? How much donations do you receive?
It's all donations, occasional a few grants for specific projects, but those grants are earmarked for specific projects.
Okay. And how many staff people do you have?
We have 11 staff.
11 staff. And of those 11, how many can dedicate themselves to finances and fundraising?
None. Other than that's my other hat.
Yeah, so I think I'd be focusing on building some partnerships, and I'd be more than glad to help you vet through some of those ideas and concepts. But and knowing who they are, and you know, obviously who they are and how they manage and their reputation, it becomes part of you, right?
Right.
So that's a significant component.
Well, we do have a fundraising committee, and we do the traditional dinner auction events and the appeal letters, and we do a raffle and all the things that small nonprofits do. We need to take it to the next level. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, yeah. Very typical thing. No offense to you, but that's kind of the TIPS approach.
Yeah.
And what we're outlining today would be more of the major gifts approach of
right.
Taking the next step. So every charity.
And that's why I'm here.
that's why I use the analogy, because that's very common that we see that across almost all charities. It's just very. In fact, I was just dealing with a donor the other day, and they were, this particular charity was doing one of these other little tip things like the auction or whatever, and it's like, I don't even want to have my name associated with, we're trying to build this case for support, Scott. And they didn't want their name on the back because of these kind of things that they've been doing. And so that's just indicative of that kind of thing, because it's like, yeah, it can be fun, right? I mean, and if it's working well for you, I'd say keep doing it, But here's the key, and what we see this very common is that just dealing with another organization within the last week or so, they had done all kinds of great events, but they're not harvesting any names from those events. They have some of the names, and so as we're going back and having these conversations, I'm telling them to go back to their table. They did use a table host concept. I said, go back to the table hosts and try to see if you can get those names. And then from there, we could, begin to process them through. And some of them have even made gifts, and because of the way they collected the money in cash and other means, they didn't capture some of that information. So it's so important to be thinking in that way so that you can take the next step. Who's next?
Tim, I've got a question in the chat room from Jared Hughes. He says, we have a major donor who says he will never give big money unless and until we have a permanent endowment where no more than 4%, assuming at least 4% growth is ever used, thus never invading the principal. How do you set this up?
I'd go meet him and go start talking to him and saying, okay, tell me what you want and how you want it. And if you want to give me a call, I'd be more than glad to. There's all kinds of resources to help you take the next step with him. But that to me sounds like an invitation to set up an endowment. And I would figure out, the substantiality of that, of what he wants to do. Obviously, if he's, not going to give as much, then obviously that's going to impact your ability to serve him. So that answer the question. Someone else, you want to add to that, Jared?
So we already talked to him. He made it very clear what I said. My question is more about how do we physically set it up with the board? The board doesn't want to be hemmed in until we reach our $5 million endowment fund goal to start. But his point is you'll never get there if you keep spending the principal. So just our treasurer says maybe we should just call it whatever it is right now, 4 million something, and be done. And that's the endowment. And then if people want to donate to the endowment, they can, and it can grow that way in addition to the principal growing. But and then he would then give, because then it would be a real endowment, not a quasi endowment. And so but my question is, how do you set that up? Is it just the board saying, the board say that we have now an endowment, it will never be invaded, we will only take 4%, and if it doesn't make 4%, we won't take anything in a given year? Or do you need to go to a bank and a trust officer and have it be completely non-commingled and separate? And then if they refuse to do it, I think that I might, as the director of development, suggest to him that he set up his own donor advised fund, make us the 4% beneficiary, and be done.
All those things could be solutions, but it sounds like the endowment that you have right now is more of a quasi endowment and not permanently.
Absolutely.
Restricted. Yeah. And so what he's asking you to do is set up a permanently restricted fund. And in essence, I would say to your board, it's time to grow up, honestly, and time to take the next step. And you have to be able to manage these various funds that come in, because endowments, come big money. And if we're not willing to establish some policies and procedures, and in essence, we're just looking for an investment policy and some basic endowment policy and procedures. We can create more documents, but in essence, keep in mind my original statement, endowment is merely a restriction on the gift. And again, from now until forever, you're willing to withhold that restriction. Similar to my example with Don and his situation, he was, as a leader, pushing back, not willing to work with these various restrictions, but also realizing that he had a whole lot of things that weren't getting funded organizationally. I don't know if I mentioned in my example, but many of the staff didn't even have healthcare benefits because they couldn't afford to offer that to their staff. And so now they're establishing funds that are permanently restricted just for healthcare. permanently restricted just for retirement. Again, they never had a retirement plan that was afforded to their staff. These are staff members that have given of themselves, and I'm sure just like your organization, Jared, tirelessly given of themselves for the greater cause of the public good of what you do. And so to be very kind to you and your board, I just say it's time to take that and make it happen. I would tend to say, what's your annual budget a year, Jared?
Well, it's complicated because it's both a 501c3 and a 501c4. There's two sides to the organization. One's a professional association / clubhouse, which is the permanent tenant of the Dacor Bacon House Foundation, which owns the house and is the permanent caretaker of the house. So there's a house side and a organization side. So it's a bit of a muddle, but basically the foundation is trying to get to that $5 million, and we're at for this, as of this last year, 405 ish. We're almost there, but I think we just need to call it and do it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And getting your accounting team to come along with you, your financial team, is sometimes the organizational development component piece, like Lewis was talking about, where we run into, you might have someone who's really digging in your heels there that you don't even know that they're digging in their heels on you, that are causing you some potential strife of taking the next step. But as I'm putting things, as long as we, whatever the minimum is, 25,000, 50,000, if they're not willing to live with a permanently restricted gift, and assuming that's a permanently restricted gift that apparently would be a healthy thing that this donor wants to do, it's hopefully doable. You can get to them and negotiate to get to that place. Are they looking to make crazy restrictions on this, or does it seem pretty reasonable?
The restrictions are simply never to invade the principal and to only take no more than 4%.
Next board meeting,
reasonable
approve
to
the policy, get it done. I assume you're managing money with some financial institution there locally. Let them help you work with an investment policy.
Right.
Typically,
my other advice,
coming
from a plan giving background, is that any endowment should by default go to the endowment, because it is a perpetual gift and an ultimate gift. And so therefore it really should, it's supposed to be a legacy gift. So therefore the proceeds should be that.
You said any endowment should be endowment. You mean any estate is an endowment? Is that what you're saying?
I'm suggesting that part of a policy, and that any organization's planned giving bequest policy should be that any bequest should go to the endowment, or you could start an endowment that way and just say any bequest that we receive goes into the endowment, into a permanently restricted endowment, period. And then there's no hemming and hawing and dickering about it.
Yeah. Jared, thanks for asking that question. I mean, those are some of the mechanics that we all deal with, right, organizationally. And again, as I mentioned, that's where if you might want to investigate a little bit further on our organizational development materials, that might help you to be able to focus in on that. But the issues, like I said earlier, being able to ask, sounds like you have the ability and the relationship to ask this gentleman. You just don't have the organizational development behind you to make that happen. So proof and concept. Lisa, you have another one for us?
I do. Nina was, I did my thing closed down. Nina's asking, we're a friends of group for a national forest. We're early in the stages of endowment planning, and we're struggling to get specific in a long-term case for support due to the unknowns of working closely with a federal entity on federal land. How specific do the examples of how we'd use the funds need to be?
My general rule of thumb would be don't restrict it unless you have to restrict it. So if the donor is, there's naturally laws that relate to public land versus private land. And I think that's beyond the scope of our conversation here today, but I would generally start, and this is how Jared got to the place that he got, because most of probably what he's been raising up to this point, sounds like is board controlled. And so, which is meaning that no one did put a restriction, they just gave to endowment, which meant the board can basically spend it down. I don't know what the exact policy is. So most people that are endowments, they're looking for more than that. There's some that will do what Jared gave us an example of, and it happens. Usually happens because there's organizational resistance to going any further. But most donors that are looking to do something, they want to put their name on it, first of all. Many times it's very unusual for them to be anonymous, although I've worked with that as well. But they're looking to do a particular, they're likely looking to do a particular thing that finds that interests them. And so I'm sorry, whose question was that? Did I answer your question? I would stay more general and not try to tie it down too much is the answer.
I think
Yes,
the
that's
only other-
helpful.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, good. Lisa,
I know Chris had his hand raised.
go for it, Chris.
So my question was, what's the difference between capital and annual? That's a basic question, but is like annual funds like your operating budget or?
Yep, you got it. Yep.
Okay.
And then the other example I gave you, and it's a good question, Chris, because I was meeting with someone not long ago, and it was kind of like I thought this was clear, but then I realized that I wasn't communicating maybe as well as I thought. But so using the ordinary mission, doing the ordinary things, is one way of breaking that down so that everyone on the team understands, hey, these are the ordinary things that we have to do. We have to do them extremely well, right? And in doing that, that's that piece. That's the annual fund. Make that real clear and concise. I was really working with this organization that had all these things that were like, we need to paint this building and we need to build this new parking lot, and they were putting that in the annual fund.
Yeah.
And what we did is we pulled that out of the annual fund, put that in the capital piece, and then added that with endowment. And now they have their 3-part ask. That was the answer.
The only thing that we're worried about doing is our annual meeting, and it's mainly trainings for those that are out in the field doing our mission, trainings on the corporation and also on what we do, which we develop the disabled to have their own service dogs.
Okay.
And
wonderful. Love it.
Yeah. So we've got an annual meeting coming up, and it's going to cost us about $5,000. I mean, it's not very much, but still, for a small organization like ours, it's,
Yeah. What's your total budget on an annual basis?
About 15,000.
Okay.
We're not a large organization. We've got 3 chapters, 2 in California and 1 in Arkansas.
Yeah. In that situation, it just depends, but I think I'd probably try to fold the 5,000 into your annual budget, and then try to think about all the extraordinary things that need to be built, like providing scholarships for service dogs, things like that. That might be maybe that's part of your annual budget too. I apologize, but glad to take that offline with you. But what we're looking for is the extraordinary things that could happen above and beyond the average things that happen on a day in, day out basis, and that would be the capital piece.
I get you. Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa,
Ian, or I'm sorry, Tim, I see probably just one more question that maybe hasn't been addressed in some form or another. It's from Ian. How do you implement this program for a Christian agency whose donors specifically support their mission? Can you reach out to new donors at the millionaire level to be a part of this Christian message and agency?
And the name again was who?
Ian.
Ian
Walker.
All right, Ian, thank you for that question. That is a very good question. In fact, I deal with that quite a bit. And in fact, here's the secret to the organizational development that you might be dealing with right now. Because being a Christian organization, most Christian organizations are very inclusive in their mission. And you're welcoming people into your mission because of who you are and who you represent, right?
Right.
And so I always work with an organization like you to say, what is your forward facing message, and how how do you communicate your mission to your community and what you do? And that might look different than the people that are ordinarily just doing what they do within your mission, okay? And another, if you go to our 2-day workshop through Major Gifts Ramp Up, we talk about this a little bit more about how do donors see themselves in your mission? And this is the key aspect of that. And most mission statements don't incorporate the donor or the donor when they read it. They do not see themselves in that. They see that you do these things for, let's say, needy people around the world or whatever it is that you do. That's your mission, okay? But donors need to see themselves in that, being portrayed as a catalyst in that need that you're fulfilling in your community or around the world. Do you follow me on that? And so
yeah.
you might have to look back at your mission statement, assuming you're using your mission statement, and make sure that donors are seeing themselves as a part of that mission. And what the interesting thing that develops is that people become ingrown within sometimes Christian organizations, and they're not looking at themselves from the outside as much as they're looking at themselves from the inside. And so looking at your public forward-facing face as well as those that you're serving on an ongoing basis that are more inside your mission is the challenge. And that's a very doable thing. And quite honestly, I think it's a thing that you want to go after anyway, because you're looking to bring more people into your mission, right?
So go back to the mission statement and really sort of hone it down. Okay.
Yeah. We have actually an exercise that I take people through that boils down your mission to something much better than a mission statement. It's what I call 3 pillars. And with the 3 pillars concept, we actually boil the mission down to 3 words. Okay. We're about doing this, this, and this. It's so much better than a mission statement. It comes out of a concept that I'm not going to drop any names, but a major software developer that we would all know, where they developed so many products, and they were having a challenge at one point in trying to help communicate both internally to their people and externally about the purposes of given softwares that were being created. And they came up with the concept of brainstorming and getting their mission down, or this particular product line that they were working down, to 3 words. And in doing that, it was transformational to the organization. That was one of the first things. And so we've been doing some of that with nonprofit organizations to help them, because most mission statements are actually sitting on a shelf. They were part of the strategic planning process. That's why Lewis said earlier about the real struggle that we see with organizations that have done strategic planning. And strategic planning is something that many times doesn't meet the frontline mission of the organization. Getting it from strategic plan to frontline is a huge challenge for most nonprofit organizations. And if you can come up with a means to get everyone agreement to say, we're all about doing this, this, and this, you won a huge battle organizational development wise, and then you're ready to take the next step.
That's great. So my question was, in doing the prospect identification, okay, so you're getting ready to look at your millionaires in your area, okay, so how do you tweak that message? But then, the plan is, right, that you want to invite certain key people to be on your committee, and then, planning for the event. So they will invite friends. But I'm just trying to think of, how do we zero down the message so that it still pertains to the Christian charity, but the charity is supporting Christians and Jews, throughout Canada and throughout the world. Okay. So, very timely right now. Yeah. And so the thing is that, but what if you don't have, what if you don't have an audience that really doesn't understand the message? Right. And so, and you want to look, and so I'm thinking new donors per se. Okay. Yes, there probably a lot that would understand, but how do you present to new donors that message through that, that policy?
Okay, what we normally do is this is a question that relates to landing case for support. And
Okay.
so have you ever done any work within your
Yeah.
organization developing
Yeah.
case for support? Okay, we
Not
have
for
an
this
outline.
organization, but I'm an alumnus of the Humber College fundraising volunteer management program. So
Oh, great.
we had a huge element on case for support. So I
Yeah.
know how to write a case for support.
Super. And
I'm
so
a little rusty because I haven't done it for a while.
yeah. So once the case for support is done, what do you do with it? What was your next step?
Well, so then we present it, to the organization, and then we start to work with them implementing different elements that, are at the top of their list.
Yeah. When I start a case for support and complete the initial outline and the framework of the case for support, you immediately want to begin through your normal donor moves management process, and hopefully
Yeah.
you have a moves management process. You begin testing that case for support in a silent phase. Okay. And
Right.
so
Yeah,
these
yeah,
are the
yeah, yeah.
most fun little conversations you have with individuals where you say, hey, this is kind of quiet. No one's supposed to really know much
Right.
about what we're getting ready to do. We're getting
And you
ready to
go
take.
back to your donors, right? So you're inviting your donors to
Mhm.
come back into your
Yeah.
major donors, and yeah. You're
I just was meeting with a charity last week, and it was a funny thing. First of all, as they were doing some of their initial sharing with it was a significant foundation. It turned into a train wreck because they were pulled off about some issues that related to um, just very difficult public things that had happened to them. But some of that is long in the past, but yet they hadn't really thought this thing all through as the way they were doing it, how they're doing it. So we just kept going, and you're refining case for support as you're going. So as I'm coaching, I'm saying, stop talking about that number because
yeah.
that number immediately makes people think about why you're not at that number. And then why did you set such a big goal for yourself? Okay. And so what we did is we ended up, and I pulled him aside and says, you've done the exercise for the 3 words. You've got kind of your case for support. Why don't you focus it around your 3 words and talk about your mission and your goals that relate to that mission that surround those 3 words? It was our way of doing a proof and concept of his 3 words. And it was also helping them rewrite their case for support. And so when we were done, we had a follow-up meeting after that, and we sat down and we said, okay, now here's what we need to do. Take everything that you just said verbally, because it was a very successful presentation in that particular setting, and let's rework that whole thing and try to write out your case for support the way you articulated it verbally. And in doing that, that's the secret of them taking their next step. So keep in mind, your initial document is more or less a library of ideas and thoughts further refined. And it may take you a while, some of these meetings, a matter of weeks or maybe even months to get things, hopefully not months, but it could be to get it refined to the point where we would encourage you to have an 8 to 12 page document. And in that 8 to 12 page document, it would embody the whole vision. You're taking them to the mountaintop of what that means. But here's what not to do with your case for support. Don't use it as a brochure. That's cheapening what
Exactly.
you've done. It takes the relationship out of the whole situation.
Yeah.
So
Thank you very much. That's a lot of good points there.
I see a hand and I see info@smilemass.org, and I apologize for not having your name.
That is my apologies. I should change that, but they use this Zoom all the time for my organization. My name is Lottie Daimidi, and we raise really more or less peer-to-peer and private foundations. I think this year we rounded 680 for the first time, and my goal was always 500,000, then 1 million, then half. We've been at this for about 14 years. We were 2 moms deciding that the world wasn't great for people with disabilities, and sort of over 2020, we piloted a program that I dreamt of for a long time that was more directed for people with disabilities, and it exploded in our hands, folding out within the last 2.5 years. I now have 11 employees, a fundraising director, a communication director, and my head is about to explode to keep up with the Kardashians. And We have a capital campaign in place that was very successful. And so, you know, I'm trying to hang out by the seat of my pants to get to my donor retention, to get to my bigger donors. And obviously we need to build a capital campaign, which we have, but we don't have endowment yet. So Tim, is there a way that I could use your head and take all my stuff that I have? Because I think I have all of this stuff we're talking about, but just in a million different places, and hire you for a couple of hours, help me consolidate this, and then divide and conquer to the amazing team, because I'm in a place now where I just can't unfold anymore, and where I need a program director just for the program we created over COVID, so I can continue to do all this important stuff with the money and continue to do the right thing.
Yeah, as a next step, we'll provide a free hour that is available to you to really begin to process this. Another thing you might want to do is consider our 2-day event, where you would be able to, you know, really process some of this through a little bit better. In fact, that would probably be, you know, one step maybe you want to take first, and you're going to get the code to attend for free. And I think, you know, a lot of this stuff is going to be kind of replayed, but in a more in-depth manner in the 2-day version. And so I would highly encourage you to consider that. But then at any point, you're welcome to circle with me and my information.
I think sometimes you have to be careful what you want, right? We always want to go big or go home, and we're going big, and it's fast. It's going so fast, I can barely catch the train, which is good, but it's also bad because I think we're going to stumble and fall if we don't catch all the loose ends as we go along. There's no reason to run faster than what we can catch.
Yeah.
So to speak.
One thing I love about Major Gifts Ramp Up, and we explain all of our different organizations and things that we do, is that we really give a lot. We believe in what we do. The reason I'm here is that this is the only organization I've ever run into that goes to this level of in-depth conversation on these kinds of topics without putting you in a position where you maybe can't afford it or whatever. We figure out a plan where you can afford it and can take the next step. And so that's the beauty of what happens through NANOE.
So would NANOE automatically, I see something. So is that the email that was just put in there? Is that what I would utilize if I want to use the 2 days to come in and learn more?
And Lisa, comment on that again. How's that work? Walk them through that real briefly.
They're registering for an event?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat. You would just simply click that link and register for an event. If anybody needs a scholarship for that, you can reach out to me at the team at nano.org. I'd put my contact information, just a couple posts above that. You can give me a call or an email, and we can go through that process getting you registered.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated.
You're so welcome.
Okay, I think we're at a point of wrapping up here. I sure do appreciate everyone hanging in. We got quite a group that stayed in with us the whole way, and that's kudos to you, and a compliment. We appreciate your engagement level, and we just encourage you to reach back out. I left my email there for you to reach out to me. I even put in my personal cell phone number if someone wants to reach out to me in that direction as well. Always glad to talk with you and visit with you. And with that, I think we're going to sign off. And unless there's someone who's just got really a compelling thing they didn't get in there, I think we got it all done. And I just want to thank you again on behalf of Lewis. Also, Jimmy sends his regards to you as well. And when you go to the 2-day event, you get to meet our founder for Major Gifts Ramp Up, Jimmy LaRose, and more from possibly Lewis, depending on who's presenting at that particular segment. Either probably Lewis or Jimmy, could be Stephanie. And we look forward to seeing you in one of those settings. Have a great day.